let's discuss this in more detail with journalist Tom O'Connor, who joins us live from New York. First of all, Tom, thank you very much for your time. Now, with the exception of India and China, as we were just hearing there, reaction from the West has been to condemn this result as a sham, in particular the US. What's Biden's main concern, Tom?
Well, I think for Biden, the concern is that after, more than 2 years now of trying to isolate Putin, trying to isolate Russia on the world stage, is that he's still a very relevant character. And that's something that's undeniable. So, even if you, of course, don't believe the figures that come out from the Russian official results, what's clear is that Putin remains a popular person. And his approval rating from previously reliable sources that relied upon before the war in Ukraine put his approval rating as high as 86%. And this follows a pattern of spikes in his approval after major events such as the war in Georgia, the annexation of Crimea, which is 10 years ago now. So I think that it represents the struggle of trying to isolate someone who keeps coming back up. And even if the West doesn't believe, of course, the numbers, I don't think that they're the intended audience here. The fact that there's been congratulations from China, perhaps that's predictable. Also, India, a long-term Russian strategic partner. Putin very much remains relevant, and these international connections continue to this day.
And could another win, Tom, for Putin, this win, could it influence November's elections? Can Russia in any way interfere?
Well, I think it's certainly no secret that Putin would prefer to see a Trump presidency, particularly given their past relationship, positive relations, as well as President Trump's disdain for Zelensky and the course of the U.S. war effort in Ukraine. At the same time, though, I think U.S. officials are certainly on the lookout for any overt attempts at state-sponsored influence, including from Russia, given the history there. And we've also seen, of course, social media companies taking more stringent policies in this field. At the same time, though, I think it's difficult. I think that, the line between what's an obvious state-sponsored influence attempt versus these grassroots campaigns that have emerged, perhaps is inspired by some of the initial state-sponsored attempts, it's become blurred. And I think that there is a lot of room there for outside actors to want to steer the narrative of the information surrounding the election.
And now entering his 5th presidential term, almost unbelievable, Tom. What can we see from this 5th term from Putin?
Well, I think, of course, the number one goal here is to capitalize on his past success in consolidating power politically, culturally across Russia over the course of nearly a quarter of a century, and to translate that into some sort of broadened legacy. And that is playing out right now, of course, in Ukraine. The conflict is now 2 years in. There is a virtual stalemate on the ground. I think all sides privately at least admit that. So what comes next, I think, is the big question. Right now, it doesn't seem that either side has much appetite to negotiate, but we're seeing those cracks that Putin had counted on in the West's determination to support Ukraine in the long term start to emerge right now. And of course, the official line is that it's unwavering support and it will continue, but it is coming at a political cost. We're seeing that in Washington, for example, where it's becoming a partisan divide, really, the issue. That's only going to be exacerbated throughout this election season and in the coming years if there isn't some sort of breakthrough in the conflict or a negotiated solution.
And of course, Tom, Putin didn't face any other serious challenger. How much of a farce does that make this election? And also a landslide victory, 87%. Does this reflect the true attitude towards Putin?
Well, like I said, I think it's difficult to really ascertain the true public opinion of Russia, particularly given the restrictions put in place since the war in Ukraine began. But, again, relying on the sources we would rely on in the past, independent sources, to sort of gauge that, Putin does remain widely popular. And it's by design that other candidates, I think, haven't been able to rise to that level of popularity or exposure, not even nominally. the late Navalny, I think, who's, I think, although, of course, he does represent a number of Russians who do want to see a radical alternative to Putin, his popularity has been exaggerated sometimes outside of Russia. Putin is by far, he's made himself essentially synonymous with Russia as a state, as an entity. And that's exactly what he was aiming to do. And I think he will continue to do. So whether or not the numbers, the percentages accurately reflect how many people prefer Putin over anyone else on the ballot or barred from running, I think it's difficult to say. But certainly, I think that just analyzing the situation, looking at how Putin's carried himself, looking at Russian society, the response within Russia to the war in Ukraine, Putin is still number one.
Tom, thank you very much. Tom O'Connor, journalist, live for us there from New York.